Most of the slaves were descendants of Aboriginal Indians that had been in the Americas for probably 10,000 years or more. The 1892 World's Fair in Chicago has a white tea European scientist claiming this exact theory. First of all, the scientist, Mr. Smith, spent a year in Colorado and inside what we now call the Grand Canyon. He excavated. He brought mummies to the fair, and I quote, "They were better maintained and preserved than the mummies in Egypt," unquote. Then he goes into the point that all the scientists today recognize that the inhabitants of these dwellings predated the historic man and that their descendants were still with us. This is a European scientist, now in America, 1892. These facts established, let's take a look at what earlier writers who had traveled to America, usually as missionaries, wrote about their experiences with the Aboriginal Indians. So you might ask, well, what happened to them? Well, first of all, many of them, millions of them are still here, and they've been reclassified as Negroes and African Americans who were brought over in the slave trade from Africa. Let's take a look at this book written in 1791. This was a missionary involved with more northern Mississippian Indians, would have been up against the Great Lakes. And he discusses how early on, like way back, 1400s, 1500s, the intermarriage begins between Europeans, who most of them were dark-skinned or many of them were Moors, but they begin to intermarry with the Indians. And then what it says is, like, when the English would defeat the French in their wars, they would enslave the Indians that were fighting on the side of the French. Now, what did that mean? Here's what you need to understand. When the English would beat the French or the French would beat the English, they were both using Aboriginal Indians as the muscle, as the fighters. So if the English beat the French, they would simply they wouldn't take them anywhere. They would just enslave the Aboriginals in place in the villages that they already lived in the towns they already built, and on the farmland that they were already producing on for thousands of years. They wouldn't move them anywhere. This 1791 writer goes on to say that at that point in the 1790s, he makes the case that most of your Indians in America are actually mixed European. Now, I think he's way off there. He's talking about your elite, and that's where you have the formation of these Native American tribes or the takeover of Aboriginal tribes by these mixed Native American elite. Very, very critical to always distinguish between the elite and the masses. It's important to emphasize that this was what I call enslavement in place. In other words, your town, your region of a tribe lost battles, and you just started working for the winners. You did the same work, only now you had to provide 10 or 20% of the agricultural production to them, to the so-called masters. And believe me, this was a very normal practice for thousands of years. So, with this understanding, what was going on in the southeastern United States at the time of the Civil War makes a lot more sense. They simply renamed them and relabeled them as Negroes and then African Americans and blacks as the new regime took over. Most of that relabeling occurs after the Civil War. It's a takeover after the Civil War. And this is the social and economic system that Americans live with today. Handsome History out.